In this video, I'm gonna give you 3 vocal chains that you can use in your mixes right now that sound like Biebs, Dua Lipa, and The Weeknd. These only require stock plugins and can be transferred to any DAW. I'll start off simple and get more complicated with each chain that we build. And if you stick around till the end, I'll throw in a bonus vocal chain that uses one of the most trending vocal techniques right now. Let's hop in. For the first chain, I'll create a simple pop sound based off the track Daisy by Justin Bieber.
Think I'd rather you in my bed.
And here's what our vocal sounds like.
But it never stops.
To change our normal vocal into something that sounds great, I started off with EQ. To my ears, the Justin Bieber vocals had a lot more mid-range than ours, so I boosted 1K in our own vocals to reflect that. I also decided to cut out some of the low and muddiness in our recording. After I did that, I was ready to tackle one of the most important frequency ranges for pop vocals. With most pop vocals, we'll want to boost up the high end. Having that sheen and that air is really what sets it apart and what differentiates pop from some other genres. If we go too airy with this, we'll get some sibilance, but a nice boost never hurt anyone. Actually, it did hurt someone. My ears. As you boost the high end, the S's of a sound become more prevalent. To help with that, I added a de-esser and dialed in the settings as follows. Let's move on to compression. My favorite compressor for vocals is Logic's emulation of the famous 1176 compressor. It's called the Studio FET. Here are the settings I started out with. A 4:1 ratio, turned off makeup game, and left the attack and release at the default settings. And after adjusting the threshold so I got a little bit of gain reduction, I did something that might seem a bit redundant. And once I have that compressor, I'm just gonna take it, hold down Option, and duplicate it. The reason that I duplicate this compressor is because chained and serial compressors tend to do a more natural sounding job than just one itself. We'll get into some other compression techniques in the later chains that I'll build, but for now, this is a good starting point. Next up, it was time to put the vocal into more of a real space. It was time for another favorite trick from pop producers. I'm gonna go into bus, I'm gonna go into bus 1, and we're gonna add our first slapback delay to try to emulate what's happening. A slapback delay emulates a sound hitting the wall of a room and then slapping back into the microphone. It adds a bit of depth and roominess to a dry vocal. So to do this, we'll go into stereo delay here. We'll take this all the way down to 63 milliseconds. We'll take the feedback all the way down. We'll take the low cut and high cut to somewhere in the middle.
Never stops if it's gonna be us.
The delay was sounding nice, but it still wasn't roomy enough. So now it was time for some reverb. And to do so, I was gonna use one of the most underrated reverb plugins in Logic. And one reverb that I've been really digging lately is the Quantec Room Simulator from Logic. The Quantec Room Simulator is a convolution reverb. Here's a quick explanation of how it works. What they do is they take an impulse response, or the measurements of a room reverb in real life, use them to emulate that in a digital sense. Basically, it just gives you realistic sounding rooms, which is great for vocals. And after adding the reverb and tweaking the settings ever so slightly, the final result was ready to show. Without any plugins.
Don't be that way. Please not today.
And with plugin.
Don't be that way. Please not today.
By the way, if you don't want to add any of these plugins yourself, I've created a vocal preset pack for you that will do it all for you. Link in the description below. More on that later. Now let's take a look at a vocal chain inspired by Dua Lipa. This next one's not as cool as the bonus chain that I'll get to at the end of the video, but it's still pretty cool.
It's your moment, baby, don't let it slip. Coming closer, are you reading my lips?
Her vocals already have a lot more processing going on. Let's hear what our vocals sound like.
Now I'm caving in, my heart's suffocating.
This raw vocal to me already sounds like it has some processing on it, specifically compression. Take a look at the difference between the high peaks and the low valleys. They're not all that different. This vocal also does something that I hear a ton in amateur vocal recordings. Were you able to pick up on it? Let me play it again.
Now I'm caving in,
It's subtle, but in this vocal, you can hear a lot more of the room noise of the recorded room. You can hear that room noise in the background. This isn't necessarily a problem, but this does mean the more compression I add to this, the more room noise I will be able to hear. It's not gonna stop us from adding compression, just something to consider. In this case, I don't think the room noise will be all that affected in the final mix because we're going to add a lot of reverb. Occasionally though, if I'm looking for an especially dry vocal, I'll ask the artist to re-record. Here's the EQ settings I dialed in. Our vocal had too much body at 200 and a bit of harshness at 4K, so I dipped those. And then I added some sheen up top. It might sound a bit thin now, but I've got something that took me years to realize that will help fix that. Typically, once you add compression, this low mid-range between like 200 and 1000 hertz generally comes up in volume more. It's not uncommon for me to go back to the EQ after I start adding compression. It was at this point that I also noticed that Dua's voice had some interesting things going on compression-wise. Take a listen to the transients of her voice, specifically the k sound. This punchy transient comes from the way that we dial in our attack and release. To get something similar, we'll want our attack to be less than 15 milliseconds and our release to be less than that as well. And then for my second compressor, my attack was slower and my release was slower so that I was hitting all of my bases. Now it's time to start adding some effects. We'll start off with a type of reverb perfect for pop music. A reverb I hear a lot in pop music is a plate style reverb, and this is emulations of an actual physical reverb where they would throw music into a plate and then record the result, and it sounded pretty crazy. I went into Space Designer, chose a plate preset, and it already sounded pretty good. Plate reverbs work really well for pop because they don't use a lot of the low-end frequencies that muddy up the sound. They're generally focused more in the mid to high range, so you can give a nice sparkle to the voice. And after adding the reverb, I wanted to add some energy by using an underused technique to affect the upper harmonics of the voice. For this next bus, I'm gonna add some grit and some distortion to the top end of the vocal, which I think will sound really good. I created a bus and added overdrive to it. Then I used an EQ to shape it so that it only affected the high frequencies of the sound. And here's what it sounded like. Then the last thing I added was a delay. I added a stereo delay on a new bus. I used EQ to make sure that it was only focused in the mid-range. I then routed that delay into the previous reverb I used on the voice so that the delay didn't sound dry. And then finally, I did a cool trick you can use so that your delay doesn't wash out your vocal. I added a compressor to that delay bus and sidechained it to the lead vocal. This means whenever the lead vocal is playing, the delay will dip down. And after all of that, here's what the final result sounds like without plugins.
Now I'm caving in, my heart's suffocating.
And with the plugins.
Now I'm caving in, my heart's suffocating.
For this third vocal, we're gonna get a little bit more complicated. We're gonna add some more cool effects that I think you're really gonna like. We're gonna be recreating a Weeknd type vocal chain. Let's hop in.
Saw you dancing in a crowded room. You look so happy when I'm not with you.
And let's listen to our vocalist, which happens to be me.
Saw you dancing in a crowded room. You look so happy when I'm not with you.
Out of all the recordings we've had, this was the cleanest. Hopefully this will give us the best results. We don't have the competing room noise like we did in the other two. I started off with EQ. EQ was a lot of the same. I got rid of the muddiness, I added some sparkle, and yeah. And then for the compressors, here are the settings I used. I used 2 studio FETs in a row and tweaked them until I was satisfied with the sound. And after both of those, this is what our voice was sounding like.
In a crowded room, you look so happy when I'm not with you.
Then to put the vocal in a space, I added every single previous bus we've made before for reverb. That includes the plate, the room convolution reverb that we used, as well as the delays, because why not? You already know how to make all of those, hopefully, if you watched the previous part of the video. Now it's time to get into some things that are a little bit spicier. Let me show you a couple cool effects that I think about for pop vocals specifically. One of them is a flanger. A flanger makes a sound feel like it's whooshing or sweeping up and down, and in small quantities can really add some depth to a vocal.
Saw you dancing in a crowded room.
That's way too much, but hopefully you get the idea of what the effect sounds like. Now I wanted to do something to give my vocal even more width. Usually for doubles, I recommend singing the same part 3 times, having one pan in the middle, one pan on the left, and one on the right. But if you only have one performance like I do in this case, you can do this trick. Create a bus and put a pitch plugin on it. Take that pitch and add 10 cents to it. A cent is 1/100th of a semitone. Pan that bus all the way right. Now add another bus and do the exact opposite. Set the pitch to -10 cents, and then pan that one all the way left. This is a faux double that you added to your track. Here's what it sounds like.
Saw you dancing in a crowded room.
After adding the double, I added one more echo and delay, side chained it to the lead voice, and then my final result was ready to hear. No plugins.
Saw you dancing in a crowded room.
And with the plugins.
Saw you dancing in a crowded room. You look so happy when I'm not with you.
And for sticking around till the end, I'm throwing in a bonus vocal chain, like I mentioned, that uses one of the processing techniques I hear most commonly used in modern vocals. Here's another song by J Biebs that exemplifies this effect.
In the phantom with the roof gone. I pull up like Jimmy Neutron.
This effect happens in a couple of ways. I'll show you those in a second, but first I want to get a basic vocal processing on my voice. To do so, I'm going to use that vocal preset pack to instantly transform the vibe. And now that I've got something that sounds good, let's hop into the first method I would use to achieve this, and it's called transposing. You can do that in Logic by going into Region and just clicking Transpose here. Let's go it up 2. This can be a good way to achieve the effect, but if you change the pitch of your vocal and not of the instrumental, it's gonna sound bad. To fix that, I have another technique that you can use that will give similar results. This technique alters the formant of a voice. The formant changes the feeling of a voice to be higher or lower without changing the pitch. You can do so by adding in the vocal transformer plugin in Logic.
If
you want 15 pop vocal chains that I'm hearing all over the radio, then you can go download my preset pack, Vocal Magic Pop, in the description below.